Yes, look, sincere apologies from Alan. He unfortunately is stuck in Auckland, couldn't get his flight back to Christchurch, and I'm not too sure whether he's just scared of a few cracks in his aeroplane or whether it's a test of our resiliency program here that I have to fill in for him. But I'll give it the best crack. So I picked up his slide notes at about 7:30 this morning, and I've had to tweak them a little bit, but no reporting back, Corinna, on what I adjust and say. And apologies for being between you guys and a coffee, of course. But look, TelstraClear, thank you and welcome to TelstraClear Seismics in the city. I'm certainly delighted to be representing the company here as South Island Manager and our CEO. And look, we absolutely believe forums such as this are hugely valuable for the people, businesses and certainly the residents of Christchurch, and we're very committed to the city's recovery as well. Look, TelstraClear has been very proud to be part of this city. We have numerous hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. We have around 230 staff in the city here, and we have a long history, about 21 years of being based in Christchurch. And so we're here for the long haul. We have a major call centre here, although I would say as a sideline, we had a lot of criticism over the last couple of years about setting up a part of our call centre in Manila, and I'd say what a lifeline that was post-February 22nd that we actually had that operating. Mostly though, it's where we have a lot of customers and, as I said, around 230 staff here as well. Look, our prime role as a telecommunications provider is to connect you guys, your businesses and people, but we try to do that in ways that are obviously making a difference in your lives and making things more productive rather than just saying it's a pure circuit. Like many New Zealanders, we watched horrified as those tragic events unfolded on the 22nd of February. I personally was actually at a training course in Auckland, and so I got to see it live on TV while most of you that were in Christchurch couldn't see anything apart from living through the destruction. And I'd like to say thanks to Jim, I don't know if he's still here, from Christchurch International Airport, because he approved the private jet we hired to get me and some other managers back into Christchurch the next morning. I think we were the second plane to touch down. And so it was good to be able to get back into the city, as surreal as that might be, coming back into a disaster zone. It's also why within the day of the first earthquake, within the day of that first quake in September, we donated $100,000 to the Mayoralty Fund. And certainly some of you will be familiar with the Bands for Hope program that we've been running. And so far that's actually raised $650,000 for the Mayoralty Fund as well. So and we're ploughing on with that until we click the $1 million mark. It's also why, alongside our efforts to ensure our network stayed up and running in the immediate aftermath of February 22nd, that we set to work with Save the Children Fund. So what we put in place there was we were well aware through our own staff and their children around the psychological aspects of going through a tragedy. So we put in place a program there around psychosocial workshops, and at last count, as far as we're aware, around 20,000 of our families, children, teachers and preschoolers have actually been through those programs for support post the quakes. Oh, business occupies a unique part of any nation and its economy, and it's the only human activity that I can think of that creates wealth. With that ability comes responsibility, both legal and moral, to our shareholders, our staff, customers and of course communities that we've just talked about. Being a good corporate citizen, however, is not about boosting our profit margins. It's about doing the right thing, making the decisions based on social purpose to do what's best for everybody. That support extends, as you would expect, to our own people, and I certainly believe that we've been very instrumental in the support we've given our staff over the last 18 months, and we've tried to do everything we can to keep them on board. That may have ranged from things, obviously most important one was the following day was guaranteeing that their jobs were safe and their pay was safe, and flowed through over the following 12 months a whole range of things that we did around investments and support for our people. Our Hereford site, which will a little sneak preview of what it looked like in the call centre upstairs. We had 100 people sitting on this floor at the time of the quake. Very interesting that we managed to get everybody out safely, apart from a few little scratches and bruises. We don't know how that occurred. If you actually were able to physically walk through this site the day after the quake, then it looks much worse than this photo. You're only seeing one little corner of it. But I do like this photo, not because of the destruction on it, but if you look at the large black and glass container lying down on the floor and halfway across the front table there, that's actually a floor-to-ceiling fish tank. The fish survived September, they didn't survive February. But what was interesting is our staff was so caring that one of the wags, as they were trying to get out of the building, turned around and yelled, "We need a bag, we need a bag," and the manager was saying, "What for?" "We need to pick the fish up." So no, the fish didn't survive, unfortunately. However, those we found afterwards did get a retrospective burial with respect. So look, as the building in what became the city's red zone, obviously we had to get out of that site. We obviously had to make a whole sort of other bunch of arrangements. Obviously I had people operating out of my front living room for a couple of months. We had people operating out of the call centre managers' front living rooms. You know, quite frankly, you've heard a lot of people talk about this morning about the people and their willingness to get on with doing things despite the circumstances. It was absolutely amazing, we found, with our staff. But it's only been in hindsight that we've understood that through our history and our pedigree and what we've done around planning and so forth allowed our people to get on and keep the place functioning. And I'll be one to volunteer this. I was quite a big cynic around the business continuity planning exercises, of which we did many. In our case, being an infrastructure provider, mostly wasn't around water, it was around to do with ground movement, whether it be volcanic or earthquake. And you know, looking back with hindsight now, I'm glad they put me through the grilling around those practice runs we did, because it stood us in very good stead when the actual event hit and it counted. So yeah, we do have comprehensive disaster recovery and business continuity plans in place for a considerable number of eventualities, and obviously that covers our network throughout New Zealand. But because we deal with disasters every week, you know, sometimes every day, it might be rats chewing through a fibre link for us. It could be floods, could be washouts, wind, as we've had in the last week with some network outages in the North Island, or even on occasions the odd bad or drunk driver taking out one of our communications pedestals on the side of the street. You know, what we've found is that our structures and our teams and our people have flowed very well, swung into action post those events and kept things functioning. However, nothing could have prepared us for the scale and the magnitude of 22nd of Feb. And, you know, we thought we were doing very, very well from that point of view. There's quite a few learnings that we got from the September quake that we took forward into the February quake, and I'll go through some of those. I think a lot of people in the room would agree that September was a practice run for February, really. So the second quake, like the first, was a multi-dimensional challenge that cut across our many disaster recovery plans. And I think for the first time on a large scale, we actually had to face the issues of the whereabouts, safety and wellbeing of the actual staff and their families. As I said, I was in Auckland. I was dragged into the Takapuna boardroom within about 10 minutes from the training course, and we were up and running within 5 to 10 minutes in that program around the boardroom. What we did is by 11 p.m. that night, actually, and it took that long to find all the staff, obviously because they'd all fled work and disappeared. And any of you who had staff that disappeared, and I've heard many stories over the last 18 months where staff just disappeared from work and you couldn't find them for days or weeks in some cases. It took us by 11 p.m. that night through a combination of both staff contact trees, mobile phones, texting, and in the end, even on Facebook, we found the last staff member on Facebook at about 11 p.m. that night. And then we also found staff in, as far as Invercargill, people who just got in the car and were so scared they just drove and drove and drove till they ran out of road, basically. So it's interesting the effect on people as you go through these sorts of processes. However, as I said, by 11 p.m. that night, we'd found them all. They're all safe and sound, and we're able to put processes in place to start bringing them back on board and supporting them as may be required. But we do differ a lot from many businesses in the fact that we're defined under legislation as a vital service, obviously, and we have obligations and responsibilities that go with that. And this means that our own disaster recovery is the least of our actual concern. Obviously, we're responsible for the disaster recovery of all of our customers, basically, and other critical services up and down the country. So, you know, you can see on the slide there, there's lots of customers we have, and you heard Jim Bolt and a few others talk about people like MAF and Customs and these sorts of people, all operate on TelstraClear infrastructure. We had to make sure that was all functioning safely as people were coming and going out of the country and the city. And unlike the message on the plane where they say, you know, put your own mask on before helping others, we don't get that luxury. We have to put both masks on at the same time and keep functioning. So in Christchurch, we have a major call centre site in Hereford Street, serving our customers around the country. It's home to around 230 staff plus contractors we have, many dozens of who are based in that site. We have thousands of kilometres of fibre, copper and hybrid coaxial network around the city, and we provide communication services to over 38,000 customers out of Christchurch. So, which is a mixture of obviously business and residential customers, all who were wanting very urgent services and changes and diversions and all sorts of things happening on that day. So we had around 80 cabinets in the affected areas that we were unable to reach because of the road damage and liquefaction damage. Obviously we had the power outages, and that affects our roadside cabinets when we have no power. Fortunately, they all click over into backup power. but the majority of these were running on their backup power, and it lasted anywhere from 3 hours to 3 days, depending on the conditions of the actual environments out there. We also have several large and vital equipment sites housed around the city, providing essential communications to obviously people like New Zealand Defence Force, Customs, MAF, Christchurch City Council and others. These sites have generators and diesel tanks that can last from 1 to 3 days. However, as we found with the roadside cabinets, some wags decided that they would actually try and abscond with the generators. Fortunately, in 2 of those cases, one was apprehended pretty quickly by the police, the second one was apprehended by the community, and I believe they were fairly well dealt to before the police arrived about trying to steal those generators, because you can imagine being in a site like that and someone taking the generator that's keeping your broadband and your telephone line going in a critical life situation. But at lunchtime on the 22nd of Feb, the stopwatch was started and we knew we were in trouble given the reported devastation around Christchurch. Subject of help, yep, look, we had contingency and redundancy plans in place for the loss of power to a site, harm to employees or damage to our network operations, but we had not envisaged, obviously, dealing with all 3 of those things at once on such a great scale. And then, of course, the flood of customer support that was required immediately on top of that. So we had a need for both focused and strategic leadership, and that became very apparent. A crucial part of our crisis incident team structure is always the leadership of the senior executive who's charged with running that. Obviously leaving Alan as the CEO to focus on other more critical things and to focus on the bigger picture and the business as usual operations. In the first quake in September, it was an interesting learning curve for us. Obviously Alan took control of the incident from day one. That was an interesting exercise. We're not convinced it was the right thing for the CEO to do. By the end of the second day, he had realised his mistake and had passed on responsibilities for key operational tasks to the incident management team and each work stream to members of his different leadership team. By Sunday, after that earthquake, Alan had enough perspective to begin worrying about what a related quake could do to our Wellington operations or our Auckland operations, because we had no idea whether this is going to turn into an even bigger, more spread event. So he was able to go off and entrust the Christchurch operations to the incident management team and then focus on some other disaster recovery potential risks that we had to think about. Lovely Wellington. Obviously, we're all well aware about the geographic risks with that city, and we have massive amounts of infrastructure and people and network services in Wellington. In the second earthquake, Alan basically chose to not wade in and take control of it. He appointed one of his key executives, who was our head of IS and network operations in Wellington, to prime that, and then they dragged me in to represent the company on the ground in the South Island for the recovery programs. So Alan went off and focused on finding our staff and our families, confident that the restoration of the network and services were being handled by the people on the ground who had the right capability to do that. However, as in the first quake, we replaced the usual consensual decision-making of our critical incident teams with a more streamlined command process and control structure. Obviously, we had to give some framework to myself and other managers in Christchurch about what they could and couldn't do. And for an example of that was if we had someone having to go into a building or to a site repairing vital infrastructure, that permission could only be given by the CEO or the delegated support person if he was unavailable, because we were well aware of the danger for staff going into buildings. And I don't know, we had a few people, not to be disrespectful, maybe thought they were Bear Grylls or something. They were happily going into any building no matter the state or the danger, and you've heard many people talk about how your staff were willing to just carry on working regardless of the situation or the risk to their health, and we couldn't allow that to happen. Obviously our staff on the ground were critical around their expertise and their knowledge, and we had to keep them safe, and in many cases we actually had to pull them off the job and say you need to stand down and take a break.